Social class and inequality. These two images depict the difference between situations that are equal compared to those that are equitable. Equality is about sameness. It promotes fairness and justice by giving everyone the same thing. It can only work, however, if everyone starts from the same place. Equity is about fairness. It is about making sure people get access to the same opportunities. Sometimes our differences and/or history can create barriers to participation. So we must first ensure equity before we can enjoy equality. It is important to remember the differences between equity and equality. For something to be equitable in our classrooms for all students, as teachers we must ensure that different resources are provided to meet the diverse needs of the students in our classrooms. During my time as a teacher, I have realised that no two students in the class come from the same background, nor have the same learning needs. Despite this, every student has the right to the opportunity to succeed. As teachers, it is up to us to understand the social, cultural, political, and economic dynamics of our students to enable us to identify each student's specific learning needs. Pierre Bourdieu focused on ways in which class hierarchies are formed through cultural factors, educational processes, and social relationships. He theorized that class power is attained through the interrelated resources of cultural capital, social capital, and economic capital. Cultural capital refers to forms of knowledge, skills, dispositions, and even social tastes that a person has, which can give them access to a higher status in society. Economic capital and social resources might be used to access and develop forms of high cultural capital as a way to distinguish and stratify social class groups. Social capital refers to the resources and support available to a person through group membership, networks, and relationships. A typical example of social capital is an elite girls' or boys' private school. Attending an elite private school can provide significant social capital to its members through work, educational, social, and cultural opportunities. Within Chapter 5 of the textbook, Education, Change and Society, there was reference made to Chris Lilly's television mockumentary, Summer Heights High, and how throughout the series we learn how cultural classes and inequalities can be shaped through schooling systems and processes. It is through the differences in access to resources and support that is available to students in private school sectors compared to those in public school sectors in Australia that leads to significant social class stratification. The main idea of achieving equity in education is to allow students from different social groups to achieve the same outcomes. There are numerous articles exploring the issues between public and private school sectors. The issues within these articles explore how the division between the two sectors, which raises educational equity concerns in the media for Australian schooling. Issues that arise include government and Commonwealth funding, academic resources, access to technology, U12 completion rates, and higher education avenues for students. Obviously, the media has an impact of parents making the decision to enrol their children within either private or public school sectors. Parental choice and impacts on this choice in selecting a school sector is something that will be explored further. This paper by Trevor Cobbold explores how choice in any education system is inevitable and cannot be denied. It also challenges some fundamental steps to improve educational outcomes and inequalities as a major challenge in Australian education. Some of the inequities that are explored include the large achievement gaps between students from low and high socioeconomic status families and between Indigenous and non-Indigenous students. Students from high SES families have much higher education outcomes than students from low SES families. 41% of students from low SES families fail to complete Year 12, compared to 22% of students from high SES families. Non-Indigenous students achieve much higher education outcomes than Indigenous students. 38 to 40% of 15-year-old Indigenous students do not achieve expected international proficiency standards in reading, mathematics, and science, compared to 13 to 14% of Australian students. We need to make improving equity the focus of national education policy in action. In a recent Year 9 Peter HPE lesson, we were exploring content related to factors influencing people's access to health information, products and services. where we're looking at the difference between situations that are equal and situations that are equitable, and I continually challenge the students to think about if they regarded particular situations fair or not fair. A fictional example that I posed to the girls regarded funding. I gave the girls 2 examples of funding and in schools to try and deliver the content in a practical and authentic way. Their school, which is Catherine Macaulay, an all-girls Catholic school, one-to-one MacBooks, Apple TVs, brand new classrooms with new desks and chairs. Compared to Parramatta High School, the local government school, no individual devices, outdated classrooms, overhead projectors replaced Apple TVs. Is this equal and equitable for the government to give $5,000 per student to attend Parramatta High and only $1,000 to the students from Catherine Macaulay? The girls said it was unequal nor equitable. Remarks of how unfair this situation was echoed through the classroom. I stopped them and started a discussion. Yes, they were correct that it wasn't equal because it was clear that the students from both schools were not given the same amount of funding. But then I asked them to rethink if they thought it was equitable. They then identified how those students at the local government school need more than themselves to have access to the same resources. We agreed that the situation would not be equal, however, it would be equitable. The students were really taken back from their initial thought about how unfair they thought the situation was. They recognised that sometimes people need more support than others to meet the same needs for everyone. Cultural difference and identity. The text Teaching Challenges and Dilemmas highlights the complexities of teaching and learning and the daily challenges that teachers must recognise and unravel. Within the text, it is suggested that significance of learning, school and education varies between different cultural groups. This variation may be due to the difference of expectations of various groups, commonly developed from members within the community's own experiences with school. As a beginning teacher, I am aware that I need to be focused on embedding relevant curriculum implications of diversity approaches within my teaching and learning experiences. This will ensure that learning at school is inclusive, meaningful, and challenging for all learners. All my life, I have grown up in a multicultural Western Sydney suburb. According to the most recent census data, more than half of the population is born overseas. Only 34.4% of residents only speak English at home, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people make up almost half the population. Teach, Learn and Grow is an Australian organisation whose vision is to help create an Australia where all children, regardless of background, location or circumstance, reach their education potential. The statistics on this slide have been taken from their site, which highlight the impacts for Indigenous students and students from low socioeconomic statuses. It is evident in these statistics that the outcomes from education vary depending on students' socioeconomic status, cultural identity, and their geographical location. During my time as a primary school student, I made really good friends with 2 Sudanese girls who fled from Sudan to seek refuge in Australia. They were both in my Year 3 class. The stories that these girls would tell me from what happened back at home were stories that sometimes I would not believe because at this age I didn't realise these things actually occurred in the world. I remember thinking how lucky I was that I was born and raised in such a lucky country. Chapter 6 from the text Education, Change and Society enable me to reflect on these experiences that I have had myself as a student. They enable me to think about the strategies that I can implement in the future as a teacher to respond and be sensitive to this diversity that will be inevitable in my classrooms. Reflecting back on this now as a teacher, teaching in schools with high percentages of Sudanese students, I am always reminded of these stories, which encourage me to consider the lives of my students at home and how I can provide my students with opportunities for multicultural relations, free from any form of discrimination. Another experience refers to my professional encounter that I had with a student when I was employed as a teacher's aide at a high school in my local suburb. I was assisting a Year 7 student who had fled from Syria to Australia. He had been living in Australia for 3 years and just started Year 7 at the school I was working at. On one occasion, the student shared his heartbreaking story of how he and his family left home with nothing except the clothes that they were wearing on their brave journey to the airport to come to Australia. The emotion in this young boy's voice was overwhelming. This young boy, more than half my age, has been through so much already in his life compared to my own. One thing from this young boy's story that has always stuck with me is how grateful he was for being able to attend the school he was at and how much he loved living in Australia because he felt safe. Referring to Chapter 6 of the text, education was a powerful incentive for migration to Australia by this young boy's family, to enable them to be able to provide better educational outcomes for their son in Australia. His story really made me appreciate that I need to be able to understand the stories of the students in my class. Through these two of many experiences that I have faced, I can assist in developing the nature of multiculturalism within schools that I'm a part of, to encourage and build on integration and to help an awareness and respect for others, and the rich diversity of alternate cultures and customs that make up our Australian society. Gender. It is important to be aware that gender and sex have separate definitions and should not be used interchangeably. Sex is determined by the biological fact of being male or female, whereas gender is a socially constructed category that defines what it means to be male or female. Gender is defined by roles, behaviours, and attitudes of a particular society at a certain time. The gender gap in high school completion rates. The textbook indicates that there has always been a general assumption that girls are more likely to complete high school than boys. However, this has not always been the case. Until 1976, boys' retention rates were ahead of girls. After the impact of the changes in the labour market, a shift occurred and female retention rates overtook those of males. Since then, they have been consistently higher than male rates by about 10%. The gender segregation in the labour market can be attributed to the bias in traditional apprenticeships, being male-dominated trades in construction, motor mechanics, and electrical works, for example. After reaching the minimum school age to leave, young males tend to sign up for these apprenticeships and commence working. Although females can sign up for apprenticeship positions, there is only a small percentage of them entering the workforce through a pathway that combines training and employment. The statistics on this slide have been taken from the New South Wales Government Education and Learning Women in New South Wales report from 2016. They illustrate the current gender differences in high school completion rates and apprenticeships comparing males to females. The gender gap between males and females in commencement of apprenticeships and traineeships has widened to about 30% in favour of men. Almost twice as many boys as girls commence apprenticeships or traineeships. It is suggested in Chapter 8 of the textbook Education, Change and Society that males in Australia who leave school without completing Year 12 have a much better labour market options than young females. In saying this, the division between women's jobs and men's jobs remains a central characteristic for Australian and New South Wales workforces. Only 10% of Australian jobs in the construction industry and 11% of jobs in the mining sector in New South Wales are performed by women, which contrasts with the large numbers of women working in the healthcare, social assistance and education workplaces. I agree with the concepts introduced within the textbook that schools can be seen as gendered organisations, and I feel that this has a great impact on these statistics that have been presented. Linking to the definition of gender being a dynamic concept that is socially constructed, researchers claim organisations like schools are gendered organisations, meaning gender has already been defined based on the social context and is not the property of the individuals that make up the organisation. Identified by Connell 2009, gender regimes refer to these patterns of gender relations that characterise particular organisations. In the school setting, stereotypically known as boys' subjects, subjects include those such as physics, computer science, and vocational education and training studies that are typically connected with future occupations that are traditionally gender segregated. Also taken from the government report, this graph illustrates the differences when comparing males and females in subjects studied for the 2015 HSC. With only around 5% of females studying construction, electric technology, and metal engineering, it becomes evident that New South Wales schools are falling under the title of gendered organisations, and raises the questions as to whether or not schools are doing anything about promoting young women to challenge social norms to study and pursue a career in these typically known as boys' occupations. Women New South Wales and the Department of Education and Communities have developed new classroom resources to assist high school girls into non-traditional trades. Non-traditional trades are those where women represent less than 25% of apprentices or workers. The Girls in Trades initiative recognises that high school is a time when students begin to seek advice on further study and career opportunities. Within the Stage 5 PTHPA syllabus, we look at potential career options and pathways for students. I feel as though this is something that is relevant to me professionally and personally, because through resources such as these ones, I can provide information and advice to my future students. I take great I take great pride in my students' interests and career pathways once they leave school. As a teacher, I believe I can impact and promote advice to my students to encourage them to challenge the social norms of society and pursue a career close to where their passion lies, despite gendered norms and stereotypes. In conclusion, social class and inequality, cultural difference and identity, and gender are issues that we face as teachers and will continue to face daily. Being informed of these issues will enable teachers to understand the influences to how students learn and also to inform our own teaching. We need to be able to investigate the relationships between theory and practice by analysing how changing economic, cultural context, political, social, and how they impact upon education systems, families, and young people. Particular issues may be interpreted in various ways. However, I believe that as teachers, our priority is the welfare of our own students. We must do our best to be informed, to understand, and to challenge social norms and discussions, to enable us to develop insightful perspectives and opinions, to improve the learning outcomes for our students, and to assist in the development of a socially just education for all students.